I'm here today to make a video that summarizes the assignment for authentic and adaptive assessments, and this will be a module for ITEC 7603. I learned a lot from this module. I learned, first of all, what it means for an assessment to be authentic and adaptive, and I'm here to show you some things that I learned with some artifacts that I have gathered. I'd like to start by briefly detailing 4 different resources that helped me shape my view, on what it means to make an assessment authentic and adaptive. The first resource was an article from Educational Leadership. And what this resource taught me after reading through it and studying it was that a very important factor for public education is that so often education is presented as a factory model in which we all teach the same thing, teach the same way, assign the same assignments, have the same assessments, and expect every single student to succeed on them. And if they do well, they're good, and if they don't, they're bad, or they're not learning. That is not the case because every student, of course, as we know, learns in different ways. So it's very important to abandon this factory model and instead we need to look at the fact that kids can display mastery in so many different ways. There are more ways for kids to display that they know how to do something in class versus just doing a multiple choice test or some type of standardized test. The second resource that I found was a paper or article written, Practical Assessment, Research and Evaluation, the Case for Authentic Assessment. What I learned from this one basically was to make tasks worthy. If students are just doing work just to do work, or they're taking tests just to take a test, they're not going to give their best because they're bored. They don't care about it. What's important is that the students see the worth of what they're doing. They see the importance of everything that they are doing in order to make sure that it is going to be a practical assessment for them and something that they can connect to future lessons and also to their future in the world. Now, the third resource I came across was for the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. What I gathered from this when the authors spent a lot of time discussing authentic assessment and what makes assessments authentic, is that assessments need to connect learning to skills that kids will need later in life. So when you're testing a kid, you don't just need to test their memorization skills or how well they can remember stuff they looked at the night before. We need to instead test students in such a way that helps them apply their knowledge, because those are the types of assessments that students are going to have when they grow up and get jobs in whatever field they choose to work in. They're going to have to prove that they know what they're doing by following certain actions and by doing certain things. So if we start giving them assessments in that way now, they'll be so much more authentic than simply doing multiple choice Scantron type tests. And finally, the final resource I had was one from EdTech Update, choosing the right adaptive learning tool. And this resource was just profound for me for getting to see all the different types of adaptive learning tools that are at teachers' disposal so that we can start giving students adaptive assessments and that we can start working with them to build off of their knowledge so that when they take assessments, it can redirect them to times where they can have review opportunities. So if they miss a few questions, instead of just going on and taking the test and failing, they can instead be redirected to a time where they can review and get a little bit more knowledge and then go back and continue their assessment and succeed at a much higher rate. So we go from here to an actual authentic and adaptive assessment that I created for this assignment, but also I will actually use this assignment for my 10th grade biology students. Currently, where we're at in our class material is we're going through the processes of diffusion and osmosis, in which the cells of the human body and also other organisms move both particles like sugar or just water, in the case of osmosis, into and out of the cell, and they travel through the cell membrane. And what I wanted to do was create an assessment that was both adaptive and authentic. Now, to cover the adaptive part, I created this osmosis quiz using Google Forms. And by using Google Forms, I was able to create it and use it in this way. So you see the first section here. I'm actually going to go to preview mode so you can see how it looks when a student takes this assessment. So for the assessment, we have osmosis quiz. It's going to be 5 questions, as we see here. And I have it set to where if they answer every single question correctly, it gives them the opportunity to move on. But if they miss a question, it's going to take them to a review opportunity. So for instance, for here, I'm going to select a couple of answers, and I'm going to make sure that I select some of them incorrectly. Osmosis is the diffusion of water, but let's just say particles. During osmosis, water flows from an area of, it's usually high water concentration to low. Let's put high to high. And from there, we'll just pick at random just to make sure that we're missing all of these. So then when you hit next, of course, we answered, if not all of them, then most of them incorrectly. When we hit next, it's going to take them to a review section and a video posted here that they can then watch and get a few more opportunities to see the material and work with it in the video. So at this point, once we get here, it tells them, that means you missed one or more questions on the quiz. Take a moment to watch the video, review the concept, go back and submit new answers. So at this point, they have the opportunity to go back, and now they can make corrections based off of the review they just did. Osmosis is the diffusion of water through a selectively permeable membrane. Osmosis, water flows from high to low. Hypertonic means the concentration of solutes outside the cell are higher. Cell is placed in a hypotonic solution, water will flow into the cell. And isotonic, of course, means that the concentrations are the same. At this point, you hit next, and they are then taken to a final clarification. I understand the concept of osmosis, and I'm ready to move on to the osmosis lab. They hit yes, next. They can then submit, and they are good. Their score is recorded, and I can see their scores. So that is what they'll see. So built into that, there are 3 instances where students are prepared to self-assess themselves. One, there's the quiz itself, in which they take the questions and see how they do. Also, they have the chance to self-assess by watching the video and checking their knowledge as they go and seeing, okay, I missed this, I got that right, I'm doing okay. And then, of course, there's going to be another self-assessment opportunity built into the assignment that follows. And this also connects to different ways to display learner mastery of the content. And this leads into the osmosis lab, in which they use gummy bears. So the third way in which students are able to self-assess in the lab, they're actually given some pre-lab questions in which they review some of the concepts of diffusion and osmosis. And then, of course, they even make a prediction based off of the lab material after reading the directions. So those are 3 self-assessment opportunities. And now, given this lab, they even have 3 different ways to display their mastery. They can take the quiz, they can do the pre-lab self-assessment, and then, of course, there is the lab itself. These also show as different ways that the learners are being assessed. The quiz, the lab procedure, and of course, later on, I will show you here, post-lab questions in which they reflect on what they did. The lab itself is another opportunity. It is the way for students to display their knowledge of osmosis in a way in which they are using real-life scenarios. They are actually using manipulative materials and working in a lab with each other, and they're demonstrating their knowledge in real time. The purpose of the lab is they take gummy bears, they have 2 gummy bears, and they put them each in 1 cup, one filled with salt water and one filled with tap water. And before they soak each gummy bear, they measure the height, the width, the mass, and they draw them. And then after leaving them overnight, they take them out, and they do the same thing, and they see how each gummy bear is affected based off whether it was left in fresh water or salt water. In which case then they can actually calculate the percentage of the change in before it soaked and after it soaked in both fresh and salt water. And then they even have the opportunity to practice with graphs. So it's even another way to display their learning from the lab. So from this, working in connection with the quiz, the pre-assessment, the post-lab questions, and then the lab itself, the students have multiple ways to display their learning, not only in the traditional test or quiz method from public schools, but also in a lab environment in which they're able to display the learning that they have gathered throughout the course of the unit. So this assessment, when taken together, is both adaptive because it takes what they are getting wrong and redirects them to a review opportunity and then lets them continue. And also, it is authentic because it's connecting their knowledge and requiring them to actually prove that they know what they're doing by applying it to a real-life scenario. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much.